This is a 100% real story, and I've changed my name to protect my identity because it left me traumatized, and I do not want to experience anything like it again. So, here's my story. My name is Juan, and back in 2006, I worked as a janitor in a large hotel in Los Angeles, California. The hotel was located in a somewhat dangerous area, teeming with gangs and homeless people living on the streets, using all kinds of substances. It was far from a tourist area, yet it attracted all sorts of guests due to its affordability. At that time, being undocumented, I couldn't secure a better job, but I was content finally being able to earn some dollars and send money to my family in Mexico. The hotel had 20 floors, but there were only 2 janitors and a few maids. The building was very old and somewhat neglected. Every day something would happen there, as I mentioned, attracting all sorts of people. Very strange people. People would do drugs in the rooms and die there from overdoses, among many other things. But one day, as I was cleaning the lobby, a guest came to check in. He looked like a homeless person, around 50 years old, with gray, long, unkempt hair, a beard, and somewhat dirty clothes. He smelled of a substance that's legal here in California. He wore glasses, so I couldn't see his eyes. I heard him request a room on the top floor from the receptionist. She mentioned that there were better rooms on lower floors since the top ones were the most neglected and old, but the man insisted on having a room on the top floor at a corner. The receptionist agreed and gave him his key. The man paid in advance for 2 weeks of lodging. He didn't bring any luggage, just a small old suitcase he carried on his shoulder. Then he went up to his room. We were used to this kind of guest, but this one gave me a particularly bad feeling from the moment I saw him. I knew he was trouble. Every day my colleague, another Latino janitor who worked the night shift, would tell me everything that happened during his shift. We overlapped for a few hours during the day and liked to chat and share everything. The day after the man checked in, the first thing my colleague told me was that in the early hours, when he went up to the last floor, he heard a girl scream, but couldn't tell from which room it came. He chose not to investigate, as it wasn't unusual for such noises to occur with many people coming to use substances, but he said this scream sounded very real, as if someone was being harmed. However, he decided not to investigate. He went back to the lobby and saw that same strange man I had seen the day before, coming down with a large suitcase, then leaving, only to return about 2 hours later with the same suitcase, which seemed very heavy. My colleague offered to help, hoping for a tip, but the man rudely told him to mind his own business in clear English and went towards the elevator. My colleague finished telling me this and advised me to be careful around that man. I told him I didn't like the guy's vibe from the start, not so much because of his appearance, but because something about him felt off, making me stay alert. Days passed and my colleague mentioned that every night the man would leave and enter with the same black suitcase. Almost every night. He wondered what was in the suitcase, as it was very suspicious. I said I didn't know, but that we shouldn't investigate. I didn't want to put myself in danger or have any problems, especially since I needed to keep a low profile as an undocumented person. But one day, it was almost 10 p.m., and I was about to leave when the manager sent me to the rooftop to check a generator because the power had gone out on the 4th and 5th floors. So, I went up with my flashlight through the stairs to those last 2 floors. Suddenly, I saw the man from above, struggling with that suitcase, telling it to shut up, and using an offensive word repeatedly. I didn't understand who he was talking to until I heard a faint whimper coming from the suitcase he was carrying. I felt an indescribable fear and decided to turn off my flashlight so he wouldn't know I was there. I silently continued up to the 5th floor and hid in a room. The man continued to his room at the end of the long corridor and locked himself in. I quickly went to listen by his door and heard the laments of a young woman, but nothing else. It was very dark and I could barely see anything from the lights of other buildings. I didn't want to turn on my lamp as I didn't want him to know I was there. That floor was unoccupied. He was the only guest there. I just wanted to be sure of what I had heard so I could report it to reception and have them call the police. When I heard her laments again, I ran to the other end to get to the stairs, but there he was, standing in front of the door leading to the stairs, looking at me. He asked me in English what I was looking for. I managed to tell him nothing, that I had been sent to the rooftop to check on the lights, which is why I had my flashlight. He asked why I wasn't going up to the rooftop to check then. I was very scared, knowing he was a psychopath. It was obvious, and who knows what he was doing in that room. So, I just said I forgot my tools. He started approaching me saying, "Let me help you." I can't describe the terror I felt. I just nodded and walked towards the stairs to the rooftop, with him following behind. All the way, I thought he was going to kill me. I had no way out. He knew I had discovered him. I wanted to cry but held it in as much as I could. We reached the rooftop, and he walked towards the fuses and started fixing them. I just stood by, watching, pretending to pay attention to what he was doing with the wires. But in my mind, I just wanted to run away. Then I saw the lights come back on through the rooftop door. He said it was done. I thanked him for his help and said I would go to reception to report that everything was fine, but he stared at me. For the first time, I saw his eyes. It was as if he was piercing me with his penetrating gaze. He said, "No, you won't." I felt a shiver run down my spine, and without thinking, my body reacted. I ran as fast as I could, ran to the stairs, and saw him following me until I reached the elevator and lost him. It seemed he had stopped following me. My heart was beating 1,000 times per hour. I felt he would be waiting for me downstairs, but he wasn't. As soon as the elevator opened, I ran to the lobby and told the receptionist to call the police quickly. He asked what had happened, and I yelled at him to call now, that someone was in danger on the last floor. The guy called emergency services quickly, and the police arrived. One of them spoke Spanish, so it was easier for me to explain everything. They went up and headed to that room, the last one on the 5th floor, where the man was staying. I went with them, and they forced their way in. There was a girl on the floor, tied up by her hands and feet, with tape over her mouth. She was very confused because the man had given her substances to keep her quiet while he transported her to his room. The police freed her and called an ambulance. Then they started searching the room. The man had a video camera and many tapes, along with many knives in a drawer, but the man was nowhere to be found. The officers closed the entire hotel, and there were officers looking for him inside. But a few minutes later, they heard screams outside, along with a crowd of people because someone had jumped from the rooftop. Yes, it was him, the man they were looking for. Everything was chaotic. They closed that street and evacuated the entire hotel. They took my statement and those of the other employees. A few days later, we found out from the local news that the man was involved in selling snow movies, forbidden films only seen on the deep web, and that during those 2 weeks he stayed at the hotel. He had filmed at least 6 of those movies with different victims he hunted at night. He used that hotel room for his misdeeds. No one ever noticed because he drugged his victims with substances so they wouldn't struggle or make noise when he transported them in his suitcase. I resigned immediately. I preferred to go hungry for a while until I found a new job rather than return to that place, a place full of evil and dark things. In case you're wondering, the hotel still operates as if nothing happened. In fact, more terrible things happened there over time, but I never returned, not even to pass by. I still have nightmares about that place, being stalked by that man, just to remind you that what we should fear the most are the living. Before moving on to the next story, I'd like you to like this video just so I know if you're enjoying our content. Thank you. Let's continue. This story I'm about to tell is deeply unsettling. My name is Andrea, and it happened a few years ago when I traveled with my now husband to Orlando, Florida. We stayed in a 4-star hotel located in the city center. Upon arrival, everything seemed normal. The hotel was very beautiful and clean. We were given room 107 on the 6th floor. We were eager to drop off our luggage and rest a bit from the journey since we were quite exhausted. Entering the room, something immediately caught our attention. The paintings hung all around on the walls were somewhat macabre. Honestly, they were like figures with faces and black hats. Distorted faces, and no limbs, and they were everywhere in the room. I felt uncomfortable right away since I'm quite fearful by nature. My husband, who enjoys scary things, also felt a bit uneasy, but there was no way to remove them since they were screwed into the wall. So, we had almost no choice but to stay. Hours passed, and after taking a shower, my husband and I decided to explore the nearby area as it was getting dark. When we returned to the hotel, we finally went to bed after a long day. As my husband turned off the light in the room, we noticed the eyes of those paintings glowing. It felt as if numerous shadows in the darkness were watching us while we slept. I told my husband that it was impossible for me to sleep like that, as it truly felt like a house of horror. My husband reassured me, saying it was nothing, just paintings, and that he was with me and nothing bad would happen. Honestly, I had no other choice since it was too late to request a room change, and I was somewhat embarrassed. So, I just closed my eyes and covered my face, eventually falling asleep. Exactly 2 hours later at 2 a.m., I checked my phone. I woke up abruptly because I heard voices chatting nearby, but they sounded more like murmurs and laughter. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but it seemed to come from the rooms next door, or so I thought. I woke up my husband to tell him. He said it was coming from inside here. My heart skipped a beat for a second and I asked, "Inside here?" He confirmed, saying it sounded like it was in the room. We turned on the flashlight on the phone and my husband rushed to turn on the light. The moment the light came on, the voices stopped. There was absolutely nothing and no one inside. I knew it was impossible since we had locked the door with a triple lock. My husband called the reception to report that people were making a lot of noise in the neighboring rooms and that it was disturbing our sleep. However, the receptionist said those rooms were unoccupied but would send someone to check and asked us to stay calm. After a while, the bellboy knocked on our door. My husband went out, and the young man told him he had checked the rooms, but that we were the only ones on that wing of the floor. He suggested the noises might be coming from the room above and wanted to investigate. He apologized for the inconvenience. Embarrassed, we told him not to worry, that we didn't hear anything anymore. So we tried to sleep again. We turned off the light and lay down, and just as I was falling asleep, the murmurs and those eerie laughs were heard again. But this time, I was completely sure they were coming from inside our room. I woke up my husband, but as he was barely reacting, I could clearly see how those paintings on the walls were flickering. I screamed, and my husband got scared. I yelled at him to turn on the light, but he couldn't find his phone. Those figures kept talking and flickering, never taking their eyes off us. When my husband ran to turn on the room light, the figures had moved to different positions. How was that possible? They no longer murmured and were completely still, but had moved to other paintings. I couldn't take it anymore and called the reception to request a room change because I was terrified, and so was my husband. They immediately moved us to another floor, and everything was normal from then on. Days later, after we had returned home, I couldn't keep this experience to myself and wanted to know what it was. So I decided to share it on my Instagram stories, and it went viral. Then, I saw many people starting to share their experiences in that same hotel room, experiencing exactly the same thing. Some mentioned that at night their hair was pulled, or their blankets were taken away. Thank God we never experienced that because we decided to leave. While reading all the people's experiences, suddenly, a guy made a video explaining the real story of that room and the hotel in general. It turns out that the former owner, who had passed away, was a painter but eventually opened his hotel, which was initially very small and only 3 stars. The hotel was struggling with very few guests and was on the verge of bankruptcy. However, he made a satanic pact for his hotel to grow and become more famous. In exchange, he would make those paintings for demons to manifest through them and steal the souls of the unlucky guests who stayed in that room. It's worth mentioning that he died there, in that same room, by suicide, or so it's believed. But people are sure it was the demons who took him because the man had planned to close the hotel since he presumably couldn't handle what he had summoned and wanted to get rid of them somehow, forget about that mistake, and move on with his life. But they didn't let him. Those demons remain in that room, although after the virality of my story and all the others that people had shared, that room was closed. The hotel continues to operate, but that room is no longer habitable for guests. Yet I still wonder if they managed to get rid of those paintings. Good evening, community. My name is Marina, and I am from Guadalajara. A few months ago, I worked as a maid in a small hotel in my city. The hotel, a modest 3-star establishment, is not in a tourist area, so we rarely had many guests, despite our affordable rates. From our first day there, I made friends with 2 other maids who had been working there longer. On that day, I was assigned to clean 2 rooms on the 5th floor, the top floor of the hotel. I finished with one room and was heading to the other when suddenly, I saw a young man leaving his room from the other end of the floor. I said loudly, "Good afternoon," but he didn't reply or turn to look at me. After that, instead of using the elevator, he went down the stairs until I lost sight of him. I didn't think much of it and continued working. When I finished cleaning the second room, I heard someone crying in one of the rooms across the hallway. The crying was filled with sorrow and sadness, although I couldn't tell if it was from a man or a woman. I approached a bit closer and saw that it came from room 120, the same room the young man had left a few hours earlier. I imagined it might have been his girlfriend who had stayed there. I didn't want to intrude, so I didn't knock on the door and just left. I went down to the first floor to continue with my work, dusting the furniture in the lobby. At that moment, a couple of tourists arrived, and I heard they were accommodated on the 5th floor. The day went by normally, and I continued working until it was 9 o'clock at night. It was almost time for me to leave, and I was finishing cleaning the hallway on the 4th floor when I received a call from the reception on the radio. The couple from the 5th floor was requesting a hotel employee to come up and assist them with whatever they needed, so I went immediately. I knocked on their room, and they both came out. They said they didn't want to cause any trouble, but for over an hour, they had been hearing banging on the walls and someone crying, non-stop in the next room, room 120. They heard sounds like things being thrown around and making a lot of noise. They just wanted someone to check if the person staying there needed help, or, alternatively, to ask them to keep the noise down, as it was disturbing their sleep. I told them not to worry, that I would talk to them, and I apologized for the inconvenience. They thanked me and went back into their room. I then called reception to tell them what the guests had told me, and to find out what I should do, as I was new. I mentioned the noise was coming from room 120. There was a moment of silence, and I waited for instructions. Then, the receptionist told me that room was empty. In fact, the entire 5th floor was vacant except for that couple who had arrived that day. I was scared, thinking maybe someone had sneaked in without paying, although it was impossible since they would have had to pass through the lobby to access the rooms. I remembered the young man I saw leaving that room earlier in the afternoon and told the receptionist to check the guest list again, as I had definitely seen someone leaving that day. He assured me that there was no one else staying on that floor. He then told me not to move from there and that he would send security to check the room and that I should not go near that door. So, I waited until the security guard arrived. He told me to stay back, took out the keys and opened the door. The room was completely empty. Everything was in place as if it had just been cleaned. There were no items on the floor or any luggage. It was empty, and everything was turned off. When we entered, the guard checked the closet, the bathroom, even under the beds, but found nothing. After that, he called the reception on the radio and reported that the room was clear. He was told, "This happens all the time. Don't worry and continue with your work." After that, he left. I immediately went down to the reception, very shocked and confused. I mentioned to the receptionist that I had seen someone leaving that room that afternoon, and that an hour later, I heard lamentations coming from that room, thinking it was a couple staying there. He said that at that moment the 5th floor was completely empty. Both of us were puzzled, and the receptionist was already nervously laughing as he couldn't find an explanation for what the guests and I had heard. He asked the guard to check the cameras for that entire day to see if the young man I had seen leaving room 120 appeared, but the guard said no one appeared in the recordings all day except for me and the recently arrived couple. I started to get scared, thinking, it's my first day, and this is happening to me, it can't be. After that, I went to pick up my things as it was time for me to leave. Then, I ran into my 2 colleagues whom I hadn't seen all day since they were cleaning on different floors. I told them everything that happened on my first day. Neither of them was surprised. On the contrary, they said they wanted to warn me, but didn't have the time to talk to me because there was so much work. They started to tell me that on that floor, whenever it was their turn to clean there, they would hear noises and lamentations coming from that room, and it was something common. The maids who had been working there for a long time always drew lots to see who would clean there because no one wanted that floor. It scared all of them, and since I was new, that's why I was sent to clean it. But very strange things happened there. I asked them if they knew who the boy I had seen leaving that room was, as I was very sure of what I saw. They told me there was a theory among the hotel workers. They said that 5 years ago, a boy from Venezuela came to stay there. He rented that room for a few weeks and lived there. But one morning, a maid knocked on his door to clean, as they had been trying to do so for a whole day, but the young man never left his room. She knocked several times, but the young man didn't answer. The TV was on, and the shower was running. So, she decided to open the room with the master key and found a horrifying scene. The young man was lifeless in the bathtub. He had taken his own life. As it was not a popular place, the news did not become famous. Only a few local media outlets reported it, but that tragedy turned the hotel into a dark place. Since then, according to the employees, things started happening, especially on that floor and in that room. Many guests complained at night about a lot of noise coming from that room and that it wouldn't let them sleep. Or they heard someone crying nonstop and asked someone to see what that person needed, but there was never anyone there. It had become routine for the staff of that place. I went home with a very bad taste in my mouth. I couldn't quit because I needed the money, and the place was very close to my home, saving me public transportation, and overall the pay was good. So, I decided to gather courage and not let it affect me, and I returned the next day to work. I found out that the couple who had arrived the previous day had left, complaining that all night they heard noises and lamentations from that room and that they couldn't sleep. They were offered to change floors, but they didn't accept as they were already very uncomfortable and just left. I continued working there for a few months, and all that time, those things continued happening. The most curious thing is that no one was ever given that room as long as I was there. It was obvious that the manager knew everything that was happening and didn't dare to put anyone there. In the end, I wonder if strange things still happen in that hotel in room 120. Thank you for watching this video. I invite you to subscribe to receive more terrifying stories. Please like the video, share it with your friends, and help spread the fear. See you in the next video.